Months afterwards, I didn't feel private in my own thoughts after that. Like I felt like I could be read, like I would just be walking around and I almost felt like a surveilled voyeur weirdness, like someone's like reading me.
Who is one of the most powerful human beings you've been around? And what made them so powerful?
That is a great question, and I've got a very odd answer for it. I had an experience when I was about 15 where I was on a school summer trip that was designed to be sort of a college enrichment, environmentally themed trip. And the person who led that trip ended up being a cultist who was very intent upon indoctrinating these 10 young kids from around the country into his group and his mindset. And it was very, very heavy duty experience. And it had a lot of impact on me. And the power of manipulation and the power of harnessing some abilities that I didn't know humans really had at their disposal that I saw this man display stuck with me now for the rest of my life. And you know, there's different forms of power. There's dark power. There's power used for good. He did not use his power for good. Quite the contrary. But he had a lot of power nonetheless. And it was actually one of the experiences that at the time in afterwards really informed me as a would-be filmmaker too, because it was the first thing I ever lived through personally that I thought, that's a movie. Because the experience was so crazy across 6 weeks and so many conflicts and, you know, forks in the road in the story that I thought I'm literally living a movie. I mean, it was very in the moment at the time. I wasn't thinking like that as it was happening, but in retrospect, I somewhat did. So power, I think power is how one human being can affect the things around them, for good or bad. You know, that's probably the nutshell way I would describe power. If you have a positive influence on people and you can get things to make things happen, that is a form of power. If you have a tremendously manipulative influence like this individual did, that is unfortunately its own form of extremely effective power, just a very misguided one. So I would say he leaps to mind first and foremost from my personal experience.
Is that what you would call maybe a dark empath?
Yes, that's exactly right. Because he was able to really, I would say more or less, literally know what you were thinking and use it to his advantage and manipulate you by way of it. That was his superpower, to put it mildly.
Right.
On the verge of you know, sort of psychic ability, I would say, to really know things about you, about your past, anecdotes about individual experiences that no one could know, but he did. And I don't have an easy explanation for it. I don't have any kind of theory really about how he was able to do those things, but he was, and it was very impactful. Stuck with me to this day.
And this was pre-internet, or
pre
AOL.
Phone. Yeah. And we were like in the middle of nowhere with maybe a payphone every 20 miles, so we were very cut off. So this was not something we had any kind of refuge from. We were just in it for weeks.
And you don't think he did any kind of like pre-interview with your parents where he would have known certain things? No?
No.
Interesting.
No,
wow,
no,
fascinating.
because I was, you know, we all banded together afterwards and told our families what had happened, and there was legal ramifications against the company and all kinds of stuff. So I think at that point they would have told me if there was some kind of pre-screening where he might have gotten some fodder to use later, and there wasn't.
Forgive me, maybe this is going back too much into this experience, but I am just really curious, and stop me if it's too much. Anything in specific where this individual who sort of encompassed this dark empathic power said or did where you were like, whoa, there is like access to things that we're not aware of?
Yeah, oddly enough, it actually has a relevance to a movie too, which is even more more plugged into the conversation at hand. What he would do was he would take each individual aside after he would do sort of a meditation of sorts. He had an Australian didgeridoo, like one of those wooden flutes that makes that low type of sound. He spent some time apparently living in Australia, and he would play that, and then he would pull one of the 10 of us aside, and then basically have a sidebar with them about something he saw, an insight into them of hyper-specific significance. And I think the last that, because I was very, I think, kind of onto this guy early on. I had very bad feeling about it, and shared as much with my fellows on the trip, that I didn't trust him from the jump. And I was the very last one that he pulled aside and did one of these sort of sessions with, let's call it. And when I was about 6, my grandmother on my father's side, my father's mother, was very tragically killed in a drunk driving accident. She was hit by a drunk driver in her car and was killed instantly, out of nowhere. Very, obviously very shocking. And after that incident, I, as a young kid does, I got very sensitized about death. I was very curious about death, right? Because you don't know what it is, and you have to kind of figure out how to process it. And at the same time that I was very concerned about death and dying, and what's going to happen when we die? Are you guys going to die? The kids go through that whole train of thought. I had seen the movie The Dark Crystal in the theater, the Jim Henson movie from way back. I saw that movie, and oddly enough, I was terrified, and I was very, very triggered by the accident that had happened, the death that had happened, and those kinds of even somewhat scary movies at that time really hit me. And I was scared of the good guy creatures in that movie, the ones that were kind of like the multi-armed, white-haired with the etchings on their face, kind of dinosaur. Not the Skeksis, who were actually the scary ones, but the good ones at the beginning. It terrified me. I don't know quite why, but they terrified me so much that I asked my dad, who was in this tremendous state of grieving at the time, to move my bed, my little army cot-sized kid's bed, from where it had been right near the entrance to my bedroom, as far away from the door as possible, because I was convinced in the night that those creatures were going to come into my room and get me. And I figured if the bed was farther from the door, I'd have a bit more notice of sort of my game plan when they came in. So he moved my bed to the far corner of my little bedroom, and this man on the trip knew exactly that entire story, which is impossible. It is absolutely impossible. That was never shared with him by any method or possibility. But the fact that I had lost this family member tragically and very suddenly was very unnerved by the impact of now understanding death at a very, relatively young age, 5, 6, whatever it was. And then having this bed moved because I was so scared of some kind of spectral creature coming into my room in the middle of the night, and exactly where it was moved, and was able to actually describe my childhood bedroom almost to an architectural exactitude. It was that's when I was like, all right, man. You win. I don't know how you're doing it, but you're doing something, and I don't like it. It was very invasive, and honestly, months after, because that was towards the tail end of this experience, months afterwards, I didn't feel private in my own thoughts after that. Like I felt like I could be read, like I would just be walking around, and I almost felt like a surveilled voyeur weirdness, like someone's like reading me. It was very dissettling. So yeah, that was one of the particulars that, without going into too much plot detail, of plenty of things that went down during that period, that I think really stuck with me. That was really like, whoa.
Right. And, you know, the notion of remote viewing and things like that has been around for decades, and they say that we all have access to be able to do that through meditation.
CIA program.
Right,
I mean, they
right.
must have taken it pretty seriously to do that, right?
Sure.
MK Ultra stuff.
Sure. But anyway, so yeah, I'm not sure through meditation or what ways people are able to sort of access that part of their brain, but supposedly we all have it. I don't know if that's true or not, but yeah, that's fascinating. And I don't know, maybe it'll make its way into a film?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. Maybe. And there's some, well, I mean, we go on such a tangent.
I
with this
know,
kind of
we
stuff,
could.
But they have shown, there's a fascinating British scientist named Rupert Sheldrake. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he had a very controversial sort of anti-Darwinian idea of evolution in science about 30 years ago called morphic resonance, that everything is underpinned by a field, and then when one thing makes a change, it becomes easier for the rest of that population to make the same change. And it happens on more of a sort of a quantum level than something like a gene just spontaneously mutating and then getting passed on. He had a whole different, and quantum physics and that kind of stuff has really caught up with him with it. It's become very kind of like, not fringe, but much more like he's onto something. But he had this amazing data of when individuals in a group would learn a skill, like playing piano or, you know, you name it, learning how to bounce a soccer ball off their head or something like that, it became easier for that group in association to do the same task when they used controlled experiments with other ones. And they did it with animals too, with higher animals that were able to repeat tasks or learn a new task. And there was no explanation for it because they weren't teaching one another. They weren't showing one another how to do this new trick. They just became, as a group, easier and able to do it. So there could be, you know, if there is this sort of like field that underlays things, then maybe that's what these empaths or these seers, whatever you want to call them, are tapping into, that they're kind of in a different level of where everything is sort of enmeshed, that they're able to pull information out of. That's the only thing that kind of, if there's a science to it, makes any sense.
How has this person influenced your work?
Extraordinarily. That experience, even though I had some of these sort of interested layers as a kid, you know, I was very into like, if people could be clairvoyant and doing sort of like ESP games with my childhood friends and seeing if we could like guess what card someone was holding, you know, stuff like that. I mean, it wasn't as esoteric as this guy got into, but I had interest in this kind of thing, this kind of, not a cult, but, you know, esoterica, like things that are a little outside the norm of human experience. I was always very fascinated by, even early on. It's just part of imagination, really. But when I went through the experience that I did with him, and collectively this whole group went through, it stuck with me because not only was it the first time that I believed that some of those powers were real, which before I didn't have any reason to be able to stand behind thinking they were. I hadn't experienced anything like that. But on the other side of that, I had to wrestle with sort of a whole sort of brain shift that if you allow yourself to believe that what this person was capable of was real, then you have to allow logically that a whole bunch of capacities must be real, that humans can tap into and that are available to us in the cosmos of powers and insights and capacities that we can harness. And that changed a lot in terms of the things that I became interested in. I got very into things like lucid dreaming and studying that. I got very into esoteric philosophies and into, reading about magic, not magic with hats and rabbits, but magic with, ability to use foreknowledge and to harness universal forces in very significant ways. I became very interested in all that stuff, and I read about, and that led me down a road even into some world religions that I was not familiar with. I wasn't personally raised with any religion. I didn't grow up in a religious household where I had sort of a structure that I had to sort of break down to take on new structures. I was tabula rasa. I didn't have any religious training of any sort. So after that experience, I started reading a lot of Eastern philosophy and a lot of Eastern religion, Hinduism, Buddhism. I just got really into exploring more about what the human sort of spiritual brain trust might indeed be, because I hadn't really been impacted by anything like that before. It was not part of my. It was not an aspect of my upbringing. I didn't see anything like that until then. So after I did, it stuck with me and it expanded me and it made me interested in expanding my knowledge of those types of things. So there was a positive in terms of that, even though the experience as a whole I would qualify as a negative. But it was catalytic in terms of my mental expansion.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.